My name is Deyanira Sanchez from Quintana Roo, Mexico. I want to share this story with you. We have always been attached to religion. At least for my family, it's always a pleasant experience to be able to serve helping others through Christ. And with this, we have seen all kinds of strange things in retreats, conferences, patronal feasts, etc., etc. But without a doubt, the most terrifying thing happened to my boyfriend in December of last year. On that occasion, we were asked to help in the pilgrimage, which was in a rural area on the Chetumal-Villahermosa highway. We would help to set up everything in the church for when the people arrived, as well as bring objects that we needed, among other things. We didn't know if my boyfriend would be able to join us because of his job, but fortunately, a few hours before everything started, he confirmed that he would be able to, although he would arrive a little late when the pilgrimage had started. Due to the dates, the weather was not only quite cold, I feel it was colder than expected in the state, but on top of that, we had a rainy day. We had hoped that afternoon would not be like that, but the forecast said otherwise. Although we had the support of a police patrol, we still had to reduce the route since there was a stretch where we would walk along the road because the church was in a neighboring town where we would start. However, that specific stretch was the only one we could not avoid. That is why we had the support of the authorities so that there would be no accident, especially because at that time, 7 in the evening, the town and the road were filled with fog. We had not foreseen that either, and imagine what it was like to drive like that. I told my boyfriend to come straight to the church. My mom and I would be there with the table preparations as well as the food sale. We were having trouble finding the church on our map app, so I gave him precise directions, this based on what we could see on the app, so he could get there, or in any case, I would be on the lookout in case he got lost. After a while, I received a message from my boyfriend who said that he had found the pilgrimage, that he was going to follow them closely, lighting them up, and that he would arrive at the church with them. It was much better that way. When I read that, it was a weight off my back to know that he was close by. Besides, he could help them by escorting them with a car from behind, since in that fog, it was impossible to see anything. I thanked him and told him to take his time and I would wait for him with his dinner ready when he arrived. The pilgrimage arrived after a while and mass began. I didn't catch a glimpse of him, but I thought maybe he had gone to park the car. I figured that we would meet when mass was over, so I didn't stop what I was doing and waited. Right in the middle of the sermon, I got a call from my boyfriend. He sounded desperate, very scared. I thought something had happened to the car while he was parking, when before I could ask him anything, I just heard him say, "Please, someone come and get me. I have no idea where I am." Quickly, I asked him to share his location with me and asked my sister for a ride. Yes, he was on the right road, just about 7 miles further than where he should have been. By this time, night had fallen, and the fog, thankfully, was gone. The good thing was that it didn't take long to find him. We found him parked on the side of the road. I got out of my sister's car and told her she could return. I would go with my boyfriend to keep him from getting lost again. What surprised me was that when he saw me, he got out of the car and hugged me tightly. I felt how his body was totally frozen. He was shivering. I also heard in his voice that he wanted to cry, but he didn't. He just asked me to drive. I said yes, just to calm him down. Once in the car, I asked him to tell me what had happened. At the beginning, he didn't say anything. It was like he was gone. One of those moments when the person you're talking to is not there. When I finally made him react, come to his senses, he began to tell me. As I said before, he was guided mainly by the directions I had given him, not having any support such as the map application. However, there were 2 very similar entrances by which he could enter the town where we would start. but he missed both exits and drove a few more miles, hoping there would be another exit. But not seeing anything, he decided to turn back. When he did, he said the fog increased dramatically from one moment to the next. But in the midst of it all, he could see a pilgrimage down the road in the distance. He didn't want to get out of the car to ask or anything, thinking it was that one. But they were walking in the dark, which makes sense since he wondered what other pilgrimage could be passing by through here. So he was following them as close as possible. From that group of people, the chants and prayer he could hear gave him an idea of how much distance he should keep. Finally, after walking for a while, they turned at one of the entrances he had previously missed, and he went in as well. He says that he drove a couple of miles further on the dirt road until the fog was too thick to see anything. He decided to get out of the car, thinking he had arrived, because he could barely see a fence in front of him. But the people could not be heard or seen. He could only make out that they were walking straight ahead this whole time. He walked a few feet with the cell phone light. As he went on, the fog was clearing until finally everything became clear and he realized that he had arrived at a cemetery. He was standing in the middle of it. At first, he thought it was part of the church structure or part of the other town. But once he crossed it in its entirety, which wasn't that big, he realized there was no one else. He shouted out loud to see if anyone would answer him or could hear him. But nope, none of the people he had seen on the pilgrimage answered him. Everything was silent. He says he ran out of there when he also realized that this cemetery was very, very old. The tombstones no longer had names. They were totally consumed by time. Most of them were broken. There were pits everywhere. When he got to his car, he got out of there as fast as he could, driving far away, which was where we found him. When we arrived at the church, the mass was already over. He was still shaking with fear, so I approached the priest to tell him what had happened, hoping he would calm him down, as I had never seen him like that. The priest asked us to go somewhere a little more discreet. Once there, he confessed to us that ghost pilgrimage sightings, as he called them, are very common out there. Many people have the theory that they are the souls of those who have passed away in some accident or whatever, and are looking to return home in some way. However, the father told us that because of how they behave, and according to what people tell him, it could also be like a trap or a lure for the living, who, like my boyfriend, take the risk without knowing, following them. Then they get them lost, never to be found again. My grandfather has never, ever left his town. He asked me not to mention it, but it is somewhat close to Linares. He has made exceptions, of course, of trips to visit other relatives, or for his work, or in his free time. But he has never lived anywhere but there. I partly understand that. The pace of life, more than anything else, is pretty quiet. I've stayed with him on many occasions, and I have a wonderful time. However, I have always preferred the city. When he can't visit us, or we can't visit him, we usually talk on the phone. Generally, we take turns to talk a long time with him. My older brother, for example, they can talk for hours about baseball without getting bored. Me, I talk to him about the animals and nature, but we are also fascinated by the paranormal. We have even, on a few occasions, listened to spooky videos over coffee and pan dulce. About a week ago, we talked on the phone for more than an hour. He sounded excited to tell me something. I, delighted, made time in my day to talk with him without interruptions. And in that conversation, all of a sudden, he said to me, "Fabian, they found the 6th tablet." I was shocked to hear that. So that you can understand me, let me give you some context. The town where he lives is over 100 years old. Even so, it's not one of the oldest in the state, but it is one of the farthest from all the others. It was one of the last to be discovered. However, my grandfather tells me that when the residents of the other areas came across this town, it was very bad, abandoned, and destroyed. But the main thing is that there were many large, unalived animals all stacked up. Goats, chickens, dogs, cats, even horses. Incomplete buildings almost collapsing, and a smell that people remember very well. It was like sulfur. Horrible and with a very ugly, heavy vibe. But when they arrived, there was no one there, so they agreed to raise the town again, rebuild it. Of course, all this with the doubt of why it was in that condition. Days later, a group of people organized to stay and start moving everything, cleaning everything up. My grandfather told me that it didn't take them long to realize that the town was visited at night by people who they later understood were part of a cult. They never really understood what these people did, but these strange people would never enter the town. They would always stay outside. But inside was where they left the animals when they took their lives. That's why they weren't going to risk talking to them. They simply decided to start remodeling everything during the day, since these people only went at nights. Don't ask me about the logic behind this. Why they wouldn't leave if they saw these people who could be dangerous. They said that they only saw these people coming from the hills. Although they always wanted to avoid contact with them, strange things began to happen to them. Strange accidents. My grandfather said, bad days in the villages where the people were from. People got sick more than before. People involved in the project began to die. Mysteriously, the animals, without anyone touching them, were also found lifeless. So much that some refused to return to that place. Most of them wanted to continue, but they felt exposed. Nothing like this had ever happened to them before, and they related it to those people. So they decided to consult the priest of the town where they lived. He told them that they could use something to protect themselves from that, not to harm those people, just so that whatever they were doing would not have negative effects on them and the new town. Some of them stuck around to remodel it. I don't understand why, and neither does my grandfather. The protection that the father suggested consisted in carving 7 boards with some specific passages from the Bible, to be later blessed by the priest. Then they would be taken to the abandoned village to be placed in a specific way in certain areas that would cover the whole village as if surrounding it. But only 2 people were in charge of this task so that no one else would know where they were, since the only way this protection could be broken or canceled would be if they found each one of them and destroyed them, either by breaking them or burning them in that same town. My grandfather's grandfather witnessed part of that whole process. For the good of everybody, they say that it worked, because all those bad things that were happening simply stopped overnight. And not only that, but they noticed that those people whose faces you could never see, I don't know if it was because of the clothes they were wearing or what, but they were no longer entering the town. They stayed at the edges, cursing those who were staying there, condemning them to I don't know what, and telling them that when all that was over, they were going to come back, and this time it was going to be very bad for them. I hope that now you can understand the seriousness of the matter, since as my grandfather told me, they had already found 6 and destroyed them. But those who managed to see the tablets first removed them from there so that others wouldn't notice, since there were those who thought it was all just a legend. I trust in God, He will protect us, my grandfather told me when we were talking about it. I asked him if they had any plan B in case the last tablet appeared, but he said no, that the town authorities never wanted to talk about it. They say it's nonsense when you ask them, or they just deny the facts. Like my grandfather, I feel some fear for what might happen to him if that is true. If those bad people follow through with what they said. That's why we also insisted that my grandfather to get out of there. But he doesn't want to. Thank you. My name is Uciel Jaramillo from Zacatecas, Mexico, and this is my story. In the town where my father is originally from, next to Rio Grande, there is a story he always told us. One that, in part, he got to live before his family moved to the city. When he was little, he would always tell us about a house in his town, a small place of about 6 or 7 blocks of people. So everyone knew about everything that happened. He would tell us about Doña Sara, a woman who had a large family, but just as in my father's case, as soon as they grew up, they left town, except for her. Although, on many occasions, her children offered her to move in with them and take care of her, she always refused, because she would always say there was nothing like home for her. She was used to the way of life and so attached to the town that it was practically impossible to change her mind, although that did not prevent her from going on vacation from time to time. The day she died of natural causes was big news in the town. It became known quickly because everyone loved that lady very much. However, one of the issues that came up sooner rather than later was to know what would happen with that house, since her children were spread out, living in different cities, and even abroad, so reaching an agreement would be somewhat complicated. The only thing they hoped was that the house would not be abandoned, and although there was movement for a few days in which funeral services were held, part of her family cleaned and so on. After a few days, no one took care of it. No one visited. Even so, the neighbors did what they could to take care of the house. They swept outside the house, touched up the facade, or simply kept an eye out for intruders. However, several townspeople began to notice that just a few days later, during the night, strange noises were heard. But when they checked, at least from the outside, nothing could be seen. At first, they thought it was an injured cat or a dog, because the sound they heard was like between a person and an animal complaining, crying, or wailing. It was not very clear, but that was more or less what they described it as sounding like. But when they looked into the windows, they couldn't see anything. A week after the death of the owner, those sounds stopped. They asked one of the neighbors who had a key to go check what was happening, since there were already a lot of people who heard that. But once those sounds stopped, it was no longer necessary. So they left all that behind as a one-time event. My dad was telling me that about a month later, another one of the neighbors passed by there late at night, coming back from having a few drinks with some friends. And when he passed by that house, those wailing sounds were heard. He says that when he heard that, he sobered up quickly and went running home. He was scared and wanted to tell his wife everything he just heard. But when he arrived, she received him, telling him that the neighbor's daughter, just a little girl, had died that afternoon. Because of the terrible news, he forgot what he had heard, and it was not until some time later that he remembered and told her. There were several nights that same week that people in the town heard those cries, until from one night to the next, they were no longer heard. People no longer dared to look through the windows as they used to. A few months later, when the strange noises stopped, the neighbor next door to that house was awakened by the same strange crying or wailing. So she decided that she would go to the church so that someone could give her some type of guidance on the matter to know what to do, since now things were getting extremely creepy. When she got there in the morning, she realized that they were celebrating Mass for a child who had died the night before in an accident. She knew that it wasn't the best time to waste the time of those in charge or the priest so she thought she would come back later. Besides, that would give her more time to make sure that that phenomenon had returned and would continue to manifest itself for at least a few more days. But unlike before, the wailing would go on for more nights. More than a whole week of listening in the middle of the night, the strange noises, when normally it was only 3 or 4 nights at the most. When she told someone else, they asked her why she hadn't told the church members, and she just explained what had happened last time. Then she asked about the child they were holding the mass for, but she was told that it was not just one child, but 2 of the family who had died that night. They began to recall the previous times and realized a correlation between those unfortunate accidents and the sounds coming out from that house. They stuck with that theory, not wishing death on anyone else. But if someone did die, they would try and connect it to the strange sounds coming out of that house. A few months went by, almost a year, and it happened. An elderly neighbor lost her life to an illness, and those sounds came back. My dad says that in the village, they say that it is the soul of the former owner who was very attached to the people of the village. Others said it was the complete opposite, that when the house started to cry, someone was going to die. The woman's children, in the end, decided to sell the house. They wanted someone to occupy it because they felt sorry for the house, or they felt strange when they visited the house and found it full of crosses, photographs, names, in memory of people who had died. The last my father heard was that it was sold, but who knows what happened in that house. Thank you. If you enjoy these stories, please give me a like and subscribe.